So the first thing that we want to be doing here, of course, is to define what we mean by this word empathy. So the questioner is saying that empathy is a weakness and empathy is a useless trait. So from our perspective, empathy is always a positive trait. It's not something that we ever want to get rid of. In fact, it's something that we want to increase, and it's something that does increase as we grow spiritually. So complete empathy expresses or functions at the three dimensions of the personality: the mind, the intellect, and the body. So with regards to the mind, we have a feeling towards the experience of another person or another being. Empathy isn't confined only to human beings, of course. We feel what the other person is feeling, a sort of resonance. So we've used this example before. If you know much about the musical instrument, the sitar, there are 20 strings, whatever it is, on that instrument, but only one or maybe two of them are actually played. The rest of them, their job is to ring in harmony with the note that is being selected by the player. So if the sitar player strikes an A note, then the other strings that are tuned to the frequency of A will also start to resonate. They will start to ring. It's called resonance frequency. So this is a good analogy of what the mind does with empathy. It resonates with the experience of the other being. It feels what they are feeling. Our mind also resonates with sadness, sorrow, heartbreak, and suffering. At the level of the intellect, there is an understanding of what the other person is going through. You're not just resonating with the experience, you're able to clearly understand what it is. So the mind feels what the intellect understands, and the intellect comprehends what the mind is feeling. There's a dual relationship. They are both resonating or both functioning in the same way. Most importantly, you might say, when it comes to empathy, is at the level of action. There is the intention to act for the other's well-being. So there is a talk called 0 Degrees of Empathy. And the speaker is discussing the Nazi death camps where Joseph Mengele was performing these so-called scientific experiments on the Jewish population there. So what he was describing in this talk was saying that, of course, he knew what the person was going through. He could see it. He could see their suffering. In a sense, he would be able to feel it also, because we all know what it's like to be in physical and psychological pain. He says, but he was able to allow that experience to continue. So this highlights a really important aspect of empathy, which was clearly missing in this example and which renders it not empathy. There is the intention to act for the other's well-being. Whenever we are in an uncomfortable situation, we want to get out of it and we want to feel better. All creatures do this. We all want our own well-being. So if I have empathy for another being, then I also take on that person's desire for their own well-being. I develop the intention to act towards it. So at the level of the mind, I'm resonating. There's that love, that identification with the experience. At the level of the intellect, there is a clear understanding of what's going on, to whom it's happening. And at the level of action, I have the intention to act towards the other person's well-being. This is complete empathy. By any metric, This is something that is going to be harmonious for our well-being and for our relationships in the world. So an important aspect to understand is that whenever we have mature empathy, it implies objectivity. So we were talking about this at the beginning of the session, that ability to stand back. The way that we describe objectivity is intellect guiding emotions, intellect guiding mind. This is what allows us to stand apart from it so that we are not adversely affected. And of course, anytime we talk about objectivity, we always bring in the same example of watching a movie. And in fact, I've heard artists and actors say that this is the valuable purpose of our art, is that it allows for empathy. When you go to the film, when you go to the play, you're able to experience all of the pain, the suffering, the trauma of the protagonists on the screen, but you're not unduly affected. So think of it this way. You would never say that when I go to watch a film, if it's a tragedy, I experience the sorrow of the characters. I think this is a weakness. I think this is useless. You would never say that. If you go and watch a tragedy and you don't feel sadness, then that's a weakness. There's something wrong with you if you can't feel the sadness of the characters on the screen. So we watch the film, we feel the sadness, but we're not affected because we are objective. So this is the understanding that we're talking about. The capacity in us to experience something without being affected by it, without wanting to make it stop. This is objectivity. This is the essence of mature empathy. So it's achieved through knowledge. So in one sense, it's what we were talking about earlier. We know that this is happening to that person. It's not happening to me. This is happening on the screen. It's not happening to me. That's what allows us to accommodate that otherwise unpleasant experience. So the opposite of this is weak pity. So this might be what the questioner is describing. So weak pity is described beautifully in the book Vedanta Treatise. It's in chapter 6. It's entitled Strength of Emotion. So what is weak pity? Weak pity is that experience where we are faced with the suffering of others and we personalize it. So if we lack objectivity, we begin to suffer. What happens then is that our intention is now no longer to assuage the other person's experience or suffering. All we're trying to do is assuage our own discomfort. The example that you might use is to say, you see a beggar, you see a homeless person on the street. I have a beautiful home. I have food in my mouth every day, 3 times a day, clothes on my back, shoes on my feet. This doesn't seem right. It's uncomfortable. I don't want to see that. So what do? I act to get rid of that feeling. And there are different ways I can do it. I can just stare at my phone and pretend I haven't seen it. That's easy. Perhaps I go and give that homeless person $1. And say, here, take this. I feel good about myself now. Why have I done that? Why have I avoided looking at it by looking at my phone? Because I don't want to feel it. Why have I given the homeless person money? Because I don't want to feel it. So I'll do something to get rid of it. So what we're doing in this regard then is acting from the emotion. And it's being done to make ourselves feel better. The other example that we might use is this notion of a people pleaser. So on the surface of it, a people pleaser sounds like a very good thing. To please others is a good thing, right? If it's done out of a sense of weak emotion, it's a negative thing. The people pleaser is always going to be frustrated. They bend over backwards to help other people. They don't get a sense of joy out of it. There's a sense of frustration. I'm doing this for you. I'm doing this to help you, and I'm not getting any recognition. It's not being done for the other person. So weak pity is the inability for us to hold our emotions, and instead they ooze out and they dictate our actions. So we have a quote here from Oscar Wilde, The Soul of Man it's from, or The Soul of Man Under Socialism. And he says, "The worst slave owners were those who were kind to their slaves, and so prevented the horror of the system being realized by those who suffered from it and understood by those who contemplated it." It's a very interesting idea that the worst slave owners were those who were kind to their slaves. Why would a slave owner be kind to their slave? Because that person's own conscience was pricking them and saying, this is wrong. The ownership of another human being goes against the natural law. You're going against yourself, you're going against your conscience, and so we feel bad. So what will I do? I'll be kind to my slaves. In doing so, one of the things he talks about is that we perpetuate the system. Better to let the entire system collapse. The example can also be used in the previous one of the homeless person, the beggar. And in fact, this again is a quote that he uses in the Vedanta treatise. He says, "This weak pity has bred a culture of respectable beggars." Now, it's not saying that we should not give, but the question is, what am I actually doing to help the situation? I give that person $1, and then I turn my back, I walk away, and I have a nice feeling. I'm such a nice person, I give money to the homeless. Okay, so that guy goes and buys a loaf of bread, eats it, and then he is exactly where he started. Nothing has changed. Next morning he wakes up in the exact same position. Meanwhile, I've got a nice feeling that I'm a good person. So we're not saying don't give, but giving should emanate from the discretion and judgment of the intellect. This homeless problem that we have, 60,000 people in LA County, what can I do to help? Okay, is giving money to the homeless people helping? I'll go and see my congressperson. I'll go and volunteer at this organization. I'll make these phone calls on behalf of this organization. This is actually trying to drive at the central core of the problem and fix it there. The point is that you're doing it because you recognize this is the way to help, not this is a way to make myself feel better. Just as a little side note, again, it doesn't mean that you stop giving money to homeless people. You may continue to do that. If you listen to interviews with our homeless population, actually giving money to the homeless people has a much larger effect than just allowing them to eat for a day. You'll hear them speak about the fact that the very idea that another person recognizes me, recognizes my humanity, and wants to reach out, they make eye contact and they give me something, that itself is a huge benefit. That reaching out with our feelings, okay, it's a dollar bill, but it's really a feeling that we're reaching out for. That itself can be beneficial. So we're not saying that giving money is inherently wrong, but what we are saying is realize what we are doing. Am I doing this because I'm genuinely trying to help the situation, or am I doing this because I'm feeling weak pity and I want to get rid of this discomfort?